guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. I am back from my holiday and I'm here today to do my July wrap up. So I'm filming this on is it the 12th today? It's the 12th of August and this video is going up today. So it's a little bit later than I would do a wrap up, but I've been away so I haven't been here to actually film it, and I always like to wait until after the very end of the month because you never know what you're going to read or finish on the last day. And I did actually finish a book on the last day of July, so there's a good example of why you should wait until the end. So I read a total of 7 books in July, which isn't too bad at all. So let's jump into what I read. The first book that I want to talk about is The Wisdom of Sundays, Life-Changing Insights from Super Soul Conversations by Oprah Winfrey. I first heard about this book because I got an email from Audible saying that Oprah Winfrey's newest book was going to become available, and it made me think, oh, she's written books in the past. And Oprah Winfrey is somebody that's always fascinated me in terms of you know, the TV shows that she's produced, the way that the topics that she talks about and things like that. So I sort of did a bit of investigating and I downloaded one of her other books, which is this one, and listened to this, and I absolutely loved this book. So basically what this is a series of excerpts from interviews that she did with various different people on a show that she did called Super Soul Sundays. And Super Soul Sundays, I believe, never watched it before, but from how she described it, it's a show where she invites guests on to talk about the soul and, you know, your spirit and different things to do with spirituality and things like that. And these people ranged from people who had written very famous books about spirituality to people who'd had various different experiences, etc. And this book is basically a compilation of excerpts from interviews that she thought were the most insightful, inspirational, that kind of thing. So what she did was she did sort of like a little introduction to that particular chapter and the thing that was going to be talked about, and then you heard the snippet of the conversation between the two of them. And I felt like I learnt so much by reading this audiobook. I will say at times there was a lot of reference to religion linked to spirituality, and of course you would probably think that because a lot of the time we do associate spirituality with following a particular religion. I'm not a particularly religious person, so I don't know, I kind of believe some of that stuff and I kind of don't at the same time. So those bits I found, it's not that they weren't helpful, it's just that they weren't particularly relevant to me, but I kind of felt like I could convert it into sort of a non-religious thing for my particular way of thinking. Yeah, and I just found it really insightful, really inspirational. I felt like I came away from a lot of those chapters feeling in myself a lot better, if that makes sense. You know, the various topics that were talked about, you know, there was stuff in there about, you know, digging your heels in and getting stuff done, you know, doing things with meaning behind them, intention, I think they called it in there. But it's been a while since I think I listened to this at the very beginning of July. Doing things with intention and thinking about why you're doing things as opposed to just doing them. And these are not particularly, you know, groundbreaking new things, but they make you wake up and sort of think about them in a different way again, which I really, really appreciated. This is definitely an audiobook that I'd like to listen to again, just because I think I'd get even more from it a second time of listening to it, even more from it a third time, etc, etc. So it's definitely one that I would recommend, and like I said, I gave this 5 stars. Next up on my Kindle, I read Amber by L. Casey. This is the first book in their Red Hot Love series, and I read this one as part of my summer romance book bingo TBR. It was for a book featuring a musician. I really didn't like this book. This book basically, the series follows three sisters that live on this hippie commune, and one of the things that I didn't like about the book is that they kept making reference to the fact that they lived on a hippie commune with their three mothers, and it was just repeated over and over again, and I was like, yeah, we've got the point. And basically the first book follows the first sister whose name escapes me, and at the beginning of the book this guy from New York comes to the house and tells the girls that their fathers are from this really famous band and they want to give them this money, and you know, the girls don't really want to accept this money, you know, where have their fathers been for their entire lives, this kind of idea. And then it's Amber, isn't it? Yeah, because the book's called Amber. I should have really realised that, but anyway. Amber decides that she's going to go to New York and kind of tell the band to stick it, but she wants to actually tell them to their face. When she gets there, she meets them and the band offer her a job kind of to update their image kind of thing, and she also meets one of the youngest band members to have joined the band, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. This book was overly long. I think it was somewhere around the 450 page mark. It didn't need to be that long. There was a lot of stuff in here where I was just like, it's just dragging, come on now, pick it up, pick it up. The writing I didn't really like at all. There wasn't an awful lot that happened in the book. It's almost like the plot is going to run through the whole trilogy. And whilst I know that writers do that, at the same time each book should have its own story arc, and whilst it kind of did, it wasn't particularly great. It was just about this relationship between the two of them, you know, and the band updating their image, and there was nothing much else going on, and it was quite boring, to be honest. What I'm disappointed about is that I also have books 2 and 3 on my Kindle, and I know I wouldn't have downloaded those having read the first one. So at some point in the future, when I'm super bored and have got nothing else to read, the other two might get read. I can't see a day like that coming though. I wouldn't recommend this book, and like I said, I gave it 2 stars. Next up in my quest to read everything that Sarah Morgan has written, I read The Nurse's Christmas Wish. This is book number 1 in the Cornish Consultants series. This is another medical romance. She was known sort of like in her early career for writing a lot of Mills and Boon and Harlequin medical romances. And I think she herself was a nurse, from what I remember of her bio. I think that's correct. Anyway, this one follows Mac and Louisa, and Mac is a doctor in the local hospital and he lives with his brother in Cornwall, and both of them are sort of like these bachelors who, you know, don't think they have time for women, or certainly don't have time for responsibility anyway. And when the book opens, Mac's brother Josh tells him that he's got a Christmas present for him. It's Christmas in the next sort of like week or so, and that Christmas present will be turning up later on that day. And that Christmas present happens to be Louisa, who is, Josh has kind of agreed that she can move in with them for a little while. She's got a job at the hospital as a nurse. She's moving to the area for the first time, spending Christmas with them, and Josh is basically playing matchmaker between the two of them, and it's about their relationship. What I liked about this one is that Louisa, she had a bit of a troubled past, and it touched on some things to do with, you know, having a bit of a tumultuous upbringing and how that affects your adult life and things like that, and the sort of like stress of working in the medical profession. But I thought Mac and Louisa's relationship was really sweet. This was written, I think, around 2005, so it's one of her sort of later Mills and Boon romances, and it wasn't too bad. I quite enjoyed it, and I gave it 2.75 stars. Next up, I read Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. This was for the Reading Rush readathon, and it covered, I think, 3 different challenges. So I read this all in one place on the coach on the way to Year 7 camp. What else did it... I've got it written down here actually. What else did it cover? A non-human main character, so in Crow, and 5 or more words in the title. So I read this and I completed 3 challenges out of the 7 I think there were. But it's the only book that I managed to read for the readathon. So I did say I would be doing a vlog for that, but it's pretty boring, the footage that I've got. And it got a bit sort of chaotic at the end of that week because I was also going on holiday. So I started sort of like my holiday vlog, and it didn't really make sense to continue on this one. So anyway, that won't be going up. But this is basically a... how would I describe this? Sort of like a long poem. Yeah, so it's a book of one long poem, and it's about a family where the mother has died. So there's this husband and his 2 boys, and they're grieving for the fact that their mum/wife has recently passed away. And Crow comes into their lives as a way of helping them deal with their grief. And Crow comes from a poem by Ted Hughes, which I can't remember the name of. Is it called Crow? I can't remember. Yeah, I can't. I think it might be called Crow, but I could be wrong about that. And the father in this is a Ted Hughes enthusiast, as you might say Max Porter is, but I don't know. Yeah, and it's about how Crow helps them out with their grief. I wouldn't say I enjoyed this. I would say I appreciated it, but I don't think I appreciated it enough. I think it's a book that you have to read more than once in order to appreciate it on several different levels, to get all of its nuances, to really, for the message to really hammer home, because I didn't feel like I completely understood everything that Max Porter was trying to say. I do think it was good, and I don't read an awful lot of poetry like this, and at times it didn't really read like poetry in the traditional sense at all. But I would say, yeah, it's definitely a book that I could do with coming back to at some point, just to kind of understand it a little bit better. So in the end I gave this 3.5 stars. Next up on audio from my library, I read The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold, and this was narrated by Louise Brearley, and I absolutely loved this book. So this is exactly what the title suggests. It's basically a book all about the lives of the 5 women that he killed. And it documents their lives from the very beginning, how they were born, where they were brought up, how they ended up in London, and sort of in the East End of London in the Whitechapel area, and then briefly touches upon their deaths. There's no description of the murders at all, and there's nothing graphic in here whatsoever. It's just about these women and who they were. But I felt like it was so much more than that too. I felt like it was a brilliant insight into the history of the time. So I felt like the Victorian era came to life a lot more for me through reading this book. So if you're into history but you don't like sort of like weighty non-fiction books about, you know, history, then this would be a great book to pick up to learn a lot more about the Victorian era. I felt like I learned a lot more about things like prostitutes, things like women's lives in the Victorian era, things like the way that people travelled around, and poverty in the Victorian era, and working class people's lives in the Victorian era. And it was so illuminating. And I also felt like the next layer to it was that it really hammered the message home about the patriarchal society at that particular time, and how women, and particularly working class women, were such a disadvantage when it came to their opportunities, and the way that they had to conduct their lives. And I really felt like that was the message. And the final chapter, which I'm not going to reveal to you what it was, really sort of hammered that home for me. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was so interesting, and I gave it 5 stars. And I've actually ordered my husband a copy of it from the library, and I do actually want to buy it in physical form as well, because I think he'll really enjoy it. So he's hoping he does. But yeah, I really recommend that one. Then I read The Ones Who Got Away by Ronnie Lauren. This is book number 1 in the Ones Who Got Away series. I read this on my Kindle, and again it was for the Summer Romance Book Bingo, my TBR for that readathon. I can't remember what it was for. Let me just flick back in my trusty notebook. Oh okay, it was for a reader first book in a series. I think there are 4 books in this series. No, I think that a part of me thinks that the 4th book is being released quite soon. Anyway, the whole premise of this series is to do with a group of 4 women who are survivors of a mass school shooting, and it's 12 years later, and there's a TV company who are making a documentary about the survivors and kind of what happened and that kind of thing. So I can't even remember her name. Okay, and our main character in this book, or the woman that this book follows, is Olivia. And Olivia was having sort of like a secret relationship with a boy called Finn in high school. And after the shooting, obviously kind of fizzled out a little bit, and now they're back in town again. She meets back up with him, and kind of the past kind of is coming back basically, and it's about the relationship between the 2 of them. I loved this book. This is one of the few romance books that I have given 5 stars to, just because I think the whole premise of the school shooting added a real sort of emotional element to the story, and it was about more than just the romance. I mean, the romance was a huge part of it, and it was really well done, but it was about so much more than that too. So the idea of, you know, the psychological effects of surviving a school shooting, how it affects your life, you know, the complications of it, that sort of idea. I thought all of that was dealt with really well, and you would think a premise like that would not be a good backdrop for a romance novel or series, but it really is. Although at least I thought so anyway. This was really steamy, so I would keep that in mind. But I loved it. I really loved it. I have the 2nd book on my Kindle, and I can't wait to get to that. I will be doing that quite soon. But yeah, this was great, and I gave it 5 stars. And then lastly, I read Getting Schooled by Emma Chase. This is the 1st book in the Getting Some series, and the 2nd book is due to be released quite quickly actually, within the next few weeks I think. And this again was on my Summer Romance Book Bingo TBR. I read it for a book with green on the cover, which you can see. And this is a romance set in a school environment, which I was a little bit apprehensive about because I'm a teacher myself, and I don't always think a school is a great setting for a romance, and I also was a little bit apprehensive about whether there would be some sort of student-teacher things going on, but I didn't need to worry about that because there weren't. And I actually think that the school setting was handled really well. So this is about Garrett and Callie, and Garrett and Callie used to be a couple in high school, and then Callie went off to college across the other side of the country, and they decided that they were going to break up because, you know, long distance relationship, all of those kinds of things. it's, I don't know, something like 10 years later, and Garrett works as a PE teacher and the coach of the football team at the school that they used to go to. And Callie has been called back to the town because her parents had a car accident and she has to help them kind of recuperate. So she gets a temporary job as the theatre teacher at the same school. And it's their second chance romance, basically. It's about them reconnecting again. I thought the stuff about Callie learning to be a teacher, because she hasn't been a teacher in the past, she's just recently got a job as a theatre director, so she doesn't know how to teach. It was funny sort of reading about her first day in the classroom and how it didn't go the way that she wanted it to, as you would expect. I mean, in the UK, you can go into a classroom with no help and no experience, but the way it generally works is that you have a year training, and then so you know, your mentor is there to help you and things like that, so you don't necessarily get thrown in at the deep end, but she does. And yeah, it was funny kind of reading about her experience and how it, you know, wasn't roses all round the door to begin with, but then she learnt to, you know, her own style and what to do with these kids and things like that, and that was really, really cool to learn about. So I think if you like things like freedom writers and stuff like that, this has got a kind of edge to it like that, so you might enjoy something like this. The relationship between Garrett and Callie was really sweet. There was a lot of steamy scenes in this book again, so just watch out for that. But I really enjoyed it again in the end. I thought it was really feel good and yeah, really fun, and I gave it 4 stars. So those were all of the books that I read in July. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them, and what did you read in July? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.